Hey guys, with Ingrid being added to the game recently, being the second best unit in the game, undeniably, it's now kind of more ambiguous as to what the worst faction in the game is. And in this video, I kind of wanted to break down what I think is the worst faction in the game, and also what makes a faction good. Because I think it's just a really interesting discussion to have, and also I think that faction needs a buff, right? We should always be trying to raise up the worst faction of the game. I just want to have a conversation as what the worst faction in the game is. So to start off with how we figure this out, we have to go into what factions it isn't. Which factions are the best factions in the game. Now, I did scrap a video idea going over every faction ranked in order, so I will just kind of start off by explaining the best faction in the game. Number one, Starpiercers. They have Silas in it. That automatically kind of makes it one of the better factions in the game. You have Vars, so versatile and amazing everywhere, and an amazing lord. Hex, Sargak, you got Nyx, you got Idril. This is not one of the worst factions in the game. You could just use common sense here. Crazy damage dealing potential for both AoE and single target. You know, they do really good against bosses, they do really good against minions. They're good everywhere. Starpiercers is my pick for like probably the best faction in the game, if not close to it. Nightmare units, also one of the better factions in the game. They're probably the most used faction apart from Starpiercers. Toreador is the most essential lord in the game right now, not just because he's the only one in his faction, but also because of everything he does with the stuns, with the tanking, with the amazing lord skill. You know, we got Arrogance in this faction, Hats in this faction, Lust in this faction. It can't be them, right? So that's two factions out of the way. Now we gotta also eliminate the Chaos Dominion, Sargak, Ardea, we got Cardelian, Desomi, you know, Valderon gone. It can't be Chaos Dominion in my eyes because the highs are just too high. There's a reason why they dominate Arena 100% of the time, and they're good in so many areas. Although they are not the most used, the highs really are just that high. And then we go to Arbiters. It can't be Arbiters. Praetus is the best unit in the game, and while the Arbiters fall flat without him, they're still all really good units, and in my eyes, it cannot be Arbiters as well. Now, Unnameable is not in the conversation because it's barely even a faction. So now we have 4 of the 9 factions out of the way. The only factions left to talk about are Watchguard, which used to undeniably be the worst. We got Northerner Throne, or North Throne, sorry. Cursed Cult, Infernal Blast, and Esoteria. And let's break it down here. So, before we get into this, we kind of have to go over the criteria to what makes a bad faction. And in my eyes, a bad faction is one where the highs are not very high. There are not a lot of units that excel in a lot of content. So in stuff like, for example, Chaos Dominion, we have Ardea, who is the best fighter in the game, right? Which automatically brings them up so high. We have Praetus in this faction, who is one of the best heroes in the game, if not the best hero in the game. We have Silas. Silas is one of the best units in the game, right? So that automatically brings the faction up quite a bit, but it doesn't fully save a faction. It is not the defining factor that saves a faction. We also have to think about viability. And viability is, to me, how you can use the faction in a variety of areas. Can you use it in multiple areas? Can you use it in Guild Boss 1, Guild Boss 2, Arena? Can you use it in the gear raids? Can you use it in the gear dungeons? All of that. Ooh, ancient. Ugh, terrible ancient. Gross. Sorry. I didn't mean to get sidetracked. But basically, like, where are they good? And is that place where they're good really that useful? Like, in my opinion, Guild Boss 2 has more weight to it than other areas of the game, like Gear Raid 1 or like Void Rift, because you can use anything in Void Rift and get it done, right? So just keep that in mind, that is into consideration. Now, another thing is we cannot go purely off of Legendary Lords, because a Legendary Lord does not make a faction. I could rank the Legendary Lords again. Things have changed for a while. Like, Elder is no longer the worst ancient exclusive Legendary Lord. but that's something to talk about later. So, when you're talking about full faction, you have to think about everything in that faction. Yeah, editing this into here, there's something I forgot to mention, which is that when we're talking about a dual faction hero, like for example, if we're talking about Pelagios and we're talking about arbiters, or if we're considering Pelagios and arbiters, then we're only going to be thinking about him as an arbiter, not as a piercing unit. Because you don't just go into a faction and then talk about a unit as if it's paired with the Lord from a different faction, if you're comparing that type of faction. And now that we kind of have that general criteria set, it is still kind of subjective, so it is my opinion. I think we do have to think about the remaining 5 factions. So out of the remaining 5, I think the next best, or at least one of the best in the remaining ones, is Infernal Blast. And Infernal Blast is probably the best boss killing faction, and just from Dolores alone, it probably saves it from being the worst. Even without Dolores, you still have Hex, you still have Zillatu, you still have Setram, Solkadins, Twin Fiend, you still have Micah, who's really good, Nocturne is really good, Pharisee is very good, Aelin, who's really solid. Like, you have a lot of really good units, and while the epics are kind of lackluster, apart from Dolores, the legendaries are so quality. I remember before Orym came out, and Aelin came out, and Anai came out, this was the best faction, because the only unit that could even be considered okay was Nocturne, and at the time, Nocturne was OP. But even with the new legendaries, they're still really good. Like, we got some of the best legendaries in the game here. And while the team is not that fleshed out, I think you have to eliminate Infernal Blast from the worst conversation. And I think the other one that has to be out of the conversation is Esoteria. Esoteria is so good. They have 2 of the best AoE DPS in the game in Boreas and Comet. They have the best unit in the game, Contender, which is Eloin. I think Eloin is probably the most important unit. Just completely. She is a cleanser, a rage regenerator. There's only 4 rage regenerators in the game. 2 of them are an esotericist faction, Laurel being the other one, which is probably a top 3 epic. And I think just that alone saves them. We also have the best tank in the game. We have a really good fighter. We have a really good mage, really good mage, really good mage. Although he's more chaotic, so he's not that good here. You know, like, we have some really, like, solid healers. Desomi's really good, even with Esotericist. You know, Seraphina is one of the most underrated units. Helga's so good. Trusku's a great tank. Like, the highs are very high here. And I didn't immediately eliminate them because they all kind of just do magic damage and stuff like that. But they're still undeniably really, really good. And I don't think they're in the running for the worst faction in the game. I think they're just too good. I think Eloin being the most important unit in the game automatically makes it hard to bring them pretty low. And with every other amazing, amazing, amazing unit in this faction, I can't do anything but eliminate it. So now we have 3 factions left, and we have eliminated 6 of the 9 factions. We've eliminated Arbiters, Chaotix, Esotericists, Piercers, Infernal Blast, and Nightmare. So now we are only left with Watchguard, North Throne, and Cursed Cult to be the worst faction in the game, is what I'm thinking right now. And we have to narrow it down from here. So let's kind of go into it, going off the criteria that we have set. So, in the Watchguard faction, what do we have that is good? Where are they used? Is the main things. So we have Ingrid, probably one of the best units in the game, usable everywhere. But apart from her, Laya is a really solid unit, one of 4 rage regenerators in the game, which automatically gives her a lot of viability. We got Constance, who's very good, but in a Watchguard faction, it's a lot less good than Arbiters, but still a very, very solid unit. Same with Alistair. Lucius, very good, but only really for Guild Bust 2. He's good in other areas, but that's his main usage. Edith kind of sucks in the Watcher conversation because she's only used in a single area. You got Cratch, Regulus, Eunomia, Allura. Allura is garbage. Eunomia has fallen out of favor recently with her being a terrible, terrible, terrible cleanser. I don't even count her as a cleanser, that's how bad she is. Regulus is fine, Edith is fine, Cratch kind of sucks. And then in the epics, Brienne and Idril aren't really considered Watcher units. They're considered piercing units. Dallin, Livian are fine, Cyrene is fine, Iona is fine, but she's not really used in this type of faction. So it's not really that good. This is definitely not a great faction. And then if we go to the North Throne, we have some of the worst legendary lords. We have a really restrictive faction, just having a bunch of tanks. Tanks are very, very easy to come by and build. So unless they excel, like Brokir, who is in this faction, they're not going to do much else. So Crowdor is not that good, like all of this stuff. The DPS is not that good. We do have Ardea, but Ardea is more of a chaotic unit. Valk, we do have, who's really good. Jira, Glacius, also very solid. Gwendolyn is pretty good. Stuff like that. And then the Curse Cult, what do we have? We have some of the worst legendary lords in the game. We have some okay units here. But realistically, I'm not seeing a lot that stands out to me right now. So I think what we have to do now is I think we eliminate Northern Throne or North Throne. I think North Throne is better than the other two. I really do. Glacius is very good now. Elder has gotten a lot better, so I do think he is better now. Jira is amazing. While she is more of an arbiter, she's still an amazing unit with Northerners. Same with Ardea. Falcia sucks. Sadie is getting more usage in Guild Wars 2. Gwendolyn's really solid, getting more usage in a lot of areas. We have Crowdor, who's okay. He's a solid tank, but there's just so many tanks in this game that are good. Shamir sucks. Valkyra is amazing. Nocturne is okay. He's pretty solid. Ours is not that bad. Maul's pretty good. Vortex is usable like literally everywhere. We got Estrid in this faction. Medan is one of 3 usable cleansers, which automatically bumps this faction up. Olog accessible and amazing. I think North Throne is not the worst faction in the game. I don't think you can call it the worst. So that brings us to Watchguard and Cursed Cult. And if we dissect these factions together, Cursed Cult has more going for it. But if you think about it, let's see, how many units here are bad? Priya, Zealous, Durza. Some of the worst heroes in the game. Lasir is bad. The Lords are only to boost stats on the other units. And realistically, because the other units don't stand out that much, it's not going to do that much. That's what makes them bad. Carnelian is really a chaotic unit. She's not really a cultist. Then we have Dahlia, we have Honora, we have Artemis. They're all solid. We got Hollow, Iona, and Greed. While it is hard for me to say this compared to Watchguard, which I already dissected, I think if I'm going off of weighing Guild Wars 2 slightly heavier than other content, if we go off the fact that esotericists are better at AoE than the faction which is purely for AoE, I think I think cultists are the worst faction in the game. I think Watchguard is saved by Ingrid now. I think because of Guild Wars 2, they've gotten better. While there is not a lot of them, they kind of are just better. Like, honestly, I think Watchguard is the second worst faction right now, and Cursed Cult is the worst faction. Cursed Cult, while they do have a lot, and you could look at this and be like, but these units are good, Destined. They're really good. Why are you talking trash about Cursed? Realistically, you have to look at it in the lens of where are you really going to use these guys, and can they be topped? Like, first of all, Morrigan, terrible unit, decent lord. Demi, okay unit. Where the hell are you going to use her? I've seen like one team with her in Guilty Guild. Otherwise, it's just Gear Raid 1 and like Gear Dungeon 1. Artemis is Gear Raid 1, Gear Dungeon 1. Pretty bad everywhere else, honestly. You're not really going to use him that much. We got Reeve, who's good for Conqueror. He's okay for AoE content. But like I said, this isn't even the best AoE faction in the game. Like Lasir, only usable in Gear Raid 1 and Gear Dungeon 1. Like Zealous, one of the worst units. Priya, probably the worst legendary. Like, Cerberus is too niche to be used a lot. you know, we got Vierna. Vierna is amazing, but that's mostly because she gives bond. It's not because of her as a unit. And she's probably the best legendary in this faction, right? Carnelian, once again, predominantly a chaotic unit. Really only that good in Gear Dungeon 2 and Guild Boss 2. And while she was amazing, she's not really a cursed unit. Durza ass, like, not even worth considering. Uridin, it's not that good. Magda is solid, but nothing that special. Dahlia is solid, nothing that special. Very good for Guild to Guild and like Gear Raid 1. Nora, solid AoE. But like I said, cursed if Esotericis didn't exist, if Comet and Boreas didn't exist in this game, would probably not be the worst faction. But the fact that they just get so outclassed by another faction by being the AoE faction that can't even do AoE the best makes them the worst. Because if you get a cursed unit for the first time and you have other options, and we're talking more like closer to endgame, this is a bad faction. Just honestly. I don't think there's any way you guys could argue to convince me that this is not the worst faction in the game. I think it has to be. But that doesn't mean that they will be bad forever. There is some stuff like Hollow to kind of save the day here, but realistically, I think we need a faction overhaul here. I think part of the reason why cultists are so bad is because there is no content to use most of them in, because they are all AoE units, and realistically, AoE damage is the least important type of damage right now. Once you get into more endgame, you don't really use it that often compared to like single target, boss killing, and stuff like that. I think we need some more content based around AoE, and also based around AoE where the cultists will be really, really good. And I think we need just some buffs on some of these units. Like Kriya is someone who should be good, but is the worst legendary in the game in my opinion. Like Magda was a good addition, but she doesn't really work with the faction. She's more as a standalone unit. You know, like there's just things that we need to change to make cultists better. So if anyone has suggestions, definitely comment. But I do think this is undeniably the worst faction in the game. So let me know what you guys think. Is this the worst faction of the game? It's still solid. It's still a good faction. This game is very balanced with their factions. So it's kind of hard to evaluate it properly, but yeah. So let me know what you guys think. Am I right? Am I wrong? What's your favorite faction in the game is mostly what I want to know. Like, what's your favorite faction? What's your favorite unit in that faction? Make sure to comment down below. And yeah, so that's kind of all I wanted to talk about. Thank you guys for watching. I do appreciate it. Like and subscribe and all that, whatever. But yeah, so I just wanted to ramble for a while, and you guys just watched me ramble, so it sucks to be you. Yeah, see you guys later. Destined signing out.